All right, all right, all right. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about the Oberst test or sideline hip extension and adduction testing on the table. So this was originally called the Oberst test, and Dr. Ober was in 1935 was the first one to start talking about this. In 1937, he came out with an article talking about how as he named it, fascial contractures in the anterior lateral aspect of the femur, causing increased lumbar lordosis when someone's standing. Sorry about the clicking. It's Chester the dog coming to visit while I make this, I guess. So essentially, in the anterior lateral aspect of the hip, I noticed that there was tightness there that it tended to put a lot of people into an increased lordotic position. So again, this was in 1937 when he wrote that, and he definitely wasn't the first one to be mentioning it. But we're talking about something getting close to 90 years ago that was being published at that point. So the initial thought and theory of a positive finding in the Oberst test was that the ischiotibial band, the IT band, right, that has a large connection from the tensor fascia lata as well as the vastus lateralis, and even some posterior aspects of the hamstrings on the biceps femoris. The initial theory was that if someone was lying on their side, right, and if they had limited amount of adduction, it must be because the IT band that would run along here, right, would be limited so that it couldn't drop down when they went to go put them on their side. Yeah. And then there was a period in which Kendall was also suggesting that that perhaps they should bend the knee as to make sure that there wasn't some sort of compensation within the anterior kind of lateral aspect of the thigh that should be tested as well when they went to go drop into the Oberst test, and that was called the modified Oberst test. So the difference between the two is basically the original Oberst test and 35 as it's published was having the knee straight, as opposed to the modified Oberst test was having more of knee flex to 90 degrees, okay? So the way the test is done for the most part, right? Someone's lying on their side. We should flex their hips probably past 90 degrees. Modified, I'm going to be talking about the modified Oberst test at this point. And what happens is you go to abduct the hip, and then you come to extend it back, okay? So in the original test, they're only looking at adduction. And but for the most part, I'll talk about this another time, where we really should be looking as, can the person even get into hip extension, right, as they go to practice this test? So can they even get here before we start looking at, can they go down? Because what if we're going to do their test and they actually are lacking full hip extension? Then what does this mean here, right? That's an issue. And I think that's where originally they were noticing that was a common finding they had with a lot of their clients, was that would really pitch people forward in this anterior tilt position. Okay. So their original theory, right, was that it was the IT band and the fascial contractures were limiting it. And then that's developed in terms of, usually when we go to PT school and we see other videos on the internet, people talking about, okay, well, we should, foam roll and have a massage and stretch out the IT band. But often, we'll see people in the clinic that have been doing that for a while, and they're not having tons of success with it. So, and I want to go over this article by Willett, and I'll post it in the notes. And basically what they did, and I'll show a graphic that I'll probably do a voiceover here in a second. And essentially what they found, right, is that there wasn't a very big difference between when they had the cadavers lying on their side and when they went to go cut through the IT band right in the middle of it, and they went to go test to see how much more adduction that the cadaver had when they went to go cut the IT band as opposed to when it was fully intact, and there essentially was no difference. It was less than a full degree difference when measured from right here of actually dropping down. So that kind of limits, again, that's dead guy anatomy. It's not the best representation, but I don't think we can be cutting people's IT bands and that are still living and breathing. So what they did in this study afterwards, then they compared it to, they cut the gluteus minimus and medius, right? So up here. Okay, so they cut that and they compared it to an intact IT band. And it dropped by like 11 degrees as opposed to the 4.5 degrees that the hip dropped when there was an intact IT band. Okay. So with the gluteus medius and minimus cut, right, as opposed to just the IT band being cut, the gluteus medius and minimus, when they went to go test it, there was about like an 11 degree increase or there was an 11 degree ability for that cadaver to get into horizontal adduction. When they only cut the IT band, it went from like 4.5 degrees with it being intact to 5 degrees of adduction with it cut. So essentially no difference, okay? So they went one step further, and then they went and cut the hip capsule, okay? And cutting the hip capsule increased the hip adduction to 13 degrees, okay? So gluteus medius and minimus had an 11 degree horizontal adduction. Hip capsule transection created a 13 degree horizontal adduction. And in the baseline, the intact IT band or a transected IT band basically remained the same at about 4 or 5 degrees. So there was either I'm going to do arithmetic correctly. So there was a 7 degree increase in adduction when the gluteus medius and minimus was cut, and there was a 9 degree difference when the hip capsule was cut. So why is this important? So let's think about just walking for a second, okay? So when we're walking, there needs to be a natural amount of this kind of shifting. And I know in PT school we often, we'll learn, well, that's a Trendelenburg gait. That's pathological. And we know, and I'll reference the book as well, the Human Locomotion book, which is a great book. Zach Couples recommended it to me during a mentor session with him, and it's really, really helpful book. But one thing that needs to happen to be metabolically efficient when we're ambulating is we need to have this side-to-side action occurring in our pelvis, okay? That's how we keep our center of gravity over the hip. So if we don't have enough adduction to keep the weight over the foot, then we're going to have to do something either at the back or the knee or the big toe or the ankle to make sure that we don't fall on our face, okay? So often that's where we think these kind of insidious onset of these kind of overuse injuries can show up with, when we're just talking about normal walking, forward actions, people having pain with walking, as well as people even just having pain when they have to stand for long periods of time. Again, if they have a lack of hip extension and a lack of adduction, they're going to have difficulty with trying to stand with any other any other strategy other than more compression at their back and this kind of anteriorly tilted pelvis position, right? So mostly I just wanted to bring up that while these strategies, these issues are definitely something that we're looking at all the time, I don't know if we want to get hung up necessarily on we have an IT band that's too tight, that there's somehow a pathological tightness to it. It just kind of out of nowhere got tight, and now you got to, beat it up and roll it out and stretch it out like crazy. While there's a lot of things and even various theories that could suggest why someone has a loss of that hip extension and adduction, it's important to try and recover those again. But I don't know if we have a whole lot of evidence to suggest that it's the IT band's fault. And for whatever reason, that's kind of where the industry, not only just in the US, but it seems like that's kind of an international take on the Oberst finding or the sideline hip extension adduction testing. Okay, so just wanted to share a couple of thoughts on that. Mostly the summary is hip adduction and hip extension are two very important things that we need to improve in our patients with any type of lower back, hip, knee, and to be honest, there's a strong argument to be made for shoulder and neck issues that can really benefit from having those measurements improved as well. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of touch base on the IT band not being the scapegoat for the lack of hip extension and especially hip adduction. Okay? All right. Everyone take care and have a good night.